But I tell you, bad things happen. What's that? That's the youth pastor? What? Josh, you've been trolled. We just started this series here. Bad things happen when you feed the troll. Isn't that true? I mean, some crazy things start to morph out. Well, we're in this series now, and we're continuing our second week. And Time Magazine ran a cover story a while back, just over a year ago, that said why we are losing the internet to the culture of hate. And what was interesting, the highlights of this article basically pointed out what we now know to be true, that more and more people are using the internet to insult each other, assault other people, to attack those with whom they disagree, and to just generally disrupt people's lives and the communities that we live in. And so last week we began this series by looking at the top 10 troll tactics. And if you weren't here last week, you can check that out. We have all our messages are online in case you're interested. You can get them through our website at LifePoint PA, and also you can get them on YouTube. We are on YouTube at LifePoint PA. If you look us up, you'll see we have 88 subscribers. We'd love to have 100. If you're into that and would like to just subscribe, we'd love to get over 100 or so. And this is a good way for you to catch up if you're away one week and you miss one of the weeks in the series, or you're trying to catch up on something in prep for a life group, or maybe something in particular catches your interest on a week that you're at church and you're like, man, I'd like to send that to a friend. So you can just kind of copy that URL, send that out to a friend, and it's a good way to kind of get the word out of what's going on. And today we just are building off that, and we looked at the top 10 troll tactics, from everything from the insult troll to the grammar spell check troll to the always offended troll to the persistent debate troll. And one of the questions that inevitably comes up in all this is, why do people use the tactics at all? You know, why are we so inclined to kind of bash others online? You know, what's happening here? Why are so many people interacting online in harsh and damaging ways? And so today we want to jump in on this by beginning to look at what some social scientists and observers of culture are seeing happening around us today, and just kind of distill down 3 reasons I think we see incivility on the rise. And it's because basically incivility in our culture has gotten momentum. It's just in our culture in particular, incivility is on the rise. In so many ways, we see our culture in decline, in a free fall, and that's particularly true when it comes to navigating conflict, dealing with issues where we disagree. We're not very good at conflict resolution today in our culture, and healthy relationships and healthy cultures have some very key principles in place that are very effective, important for marriages. They're important for navigating issues with our kids, our parents, and just in communities in general. And it really begins with healthy communication skills, conflict resolution skills. It begins with simple things like listening to the other person and what they're saying, having empathy for the other person, where we respect them. Even if we don't agree with them or we don't see their side, we respect them at least minimally, if not for their position, for the fact that they're a human being, that we show respect for them as a human being, at least minimally. And then we can stay focused on the issue rather than all these peripheral things, you know, we're like this sidetracked by this and that, and they stay focused on the issue. That's how you get things resolved. Then you agree to disagree. That there are smart people who come at things from different angles. We're thinking people. We have perspectives. They're valid. We should throw those out. They should be part of the mix. They should contribute to the pool of meaning. And so we agree to disagree. We look for areas of commonality, of common ground. We compromise, and then we solve problems. But what's happening today is that these skills are largely eroding in our culture. They're eroding in marriages. That's why marriages are just breaking apart. It's eroding largely in culture today because we don't do these things very well. Ultimately, I think it comes down to that instead of talking, we're now shouting at each other. Instead of respect and empathy, we refuse to give respect to somebody that we don't agree with, or we withhold that with respect. We see disagreement now as hate. We can't agree to disagree because disagreement is hate, and we definitely don't want to compromise and find common ground because compromise is always a sellout. If you compromise, it's an absolute sellout. And so what is the price we pay for this? Good people battling and fighting it out and never resolving their issues. Conflict remains. You know, the danger in all this, with this toxic societal mix, the danger is that when we can't talk anymore, when we can't have an adult conversation, when we can't solve our problems, what do we resort to? It's all about power. It's the person who's the biggest person or the most vocal, verbal person who's really witty and like, boom, can get you back. You know, they're real sharp. It's all about power now and what I can do to make you kind of acquiesce to my position and my views. It really is sets the stage for bullying and belittling, which is very prevalent online today. And make no mistake about it, as our culture tends to have this problem with conflict resolution, that more sinister forces around the world know this. And you've probably followed the news, and there's a lot of discussion about Russian bots, and they're basically throwing news stories, maybe fake or real or otherwise, into our social media news feeds. And the question is, some people believe that these Russian bots are throwing issues in to support conservative causes, and some are throwing them in to support liberal causes. But I think what we miss in all of this, and new research is finding, is that these aren't partisan issues at all. They don't have any partisan interest whatsoever. But they have great interest in fueling the division and divisiveness of our culture. So a lot more is at stake than our partisan interests. Really, the health of our nation is at stake. The health of our relationships is at stake in all this. Because ultimately, if we can't agree on things and work through things, then discord prevails. We also see that there are very few examples of conflict resolution in our culture. We have leaders, national leaders from both parties at every level of government that have basically given up problem solving and have resorted to insults and attacks. And we wonder why we're affected by that. Because what our leaders do trickle down to us. And people from both parties, from across the spectrum, are responsible for this. So ultimately, we would expect that with this incivility brewing up within, that there be some around us who'd say, you want to throw logs on this? You want to self-destruct? We'll help you. We'll throw gasoline on it as well. Great nations rarely get run over by other powerful nations. They can often, as we see throughout history, the Romes of history, they implode, they deteriorate from within. And incivility is a serious issue today, and it's on the rise. Another reason that we see this negativity happening is that shouting makes people money. Shouting makes people big money. I mean, social media platforms won't tell you this, but they have a vested interest in incivility. They like it. Because if we're shouting at each other and there's rudeness and there's fighting and these type of things, they love that. Because the more people that are riled, the more people that are angry, the more people that are interacting, the more people see the ads, they click those ads, and in fact, clicks equal money. So they're making big bucks off incivility. Frank Pasquale, law professor at the University of Maryland, wrote in a report that very often hate, anxiety, and anger drive participation with the platform. And whatever behavior increases ad revenue will not only be permitted, but encouraged, excepting, of course, the most egregious cases. Facebook even has algorithms. They've been in the news recently. They have algorithms that are supposed to increase a relevant experience for Facebook users, but they do a lot more than that. They also increase ad exposure, so you click and they make money. So the social media platforms, again, have a vested interest in us fighting with each other. But there's one more thing that contributes to this sense of negativity that's growing in our culture, and the trolling that comes out of it. What psychologists are calling now the online disinhibition effect erodes restraint. The online disinhibition effect erodes restraint. What does that mean? Have you ever noticed that sometimes people we love over time lose their filter? Have you ever known that? Maybe grandma's getting a little bit older and grandma has said some of the craziest things. She's like, grandma's out there and grandpa, and they didn't used to say these things, but now, for whatever reason, they say whatever is on their mind, they just kind of blurt it out there. They used to filter it. They don't. If you're looking at somebody and thinking that that's someone you know, be careful because it might be you someday. But we tend over time to lose this filter. Well, that's what happens to these people. They get online and there's this disinhibition. They lose their inhibitions because they hide behind their computer screen. They're hiding behind their screen and they can be anonymous. So they throw out all kinds of stuff, barbs, insults, false accusations, smears. They throw these things out there and then they hide behind the screen because they basically don't find themselves needing to be guided by social etiquette. They don't need to respond to the social barriers that are in place that curb negative behavior. And so they are inclined to just spout out whatever is on their mind. And so this is a perfect storm of incivility, the loss of social skills, the lack of examples of people who resolve conflict in healthy ways, people who are invisible on the internet, who attack other people, shouting, making people money, and all of this creates an environment where trolls thrive. And that's what's happening. They come out of the woodwork. They are everywhere. And so the question for us today is, how do we deal with negative people in general, but trolls in particular? And I think there's several things we can do. The first is that we have to be careful not to take the bait. Don't take the bait. Last week we looked at how Jesus in his last week on the planet was trolled really hard by a lot of different people. He was trolled by the crowds. There were crowds of people who basically laughed and scoffed at Jesus. The soldiers themselves, they mocked Jesus. The religious leaders, they hated Jesus. So Jesus is getting trolled really hard from a variety of different people. And we also looked at how Jesus didn't respond. We looked at what he didn't do. He didn't get vindictive. He didn't get hateful. He didn't get down in the gutter with other people. In fact, what's really interesting is that Jesus responded with amazing self-discipline to getting trolled. So much so that Peter, who was around and in the mix at that time, Peter was so struck by Jesus' self-restraint that when he wrote a letter in the Bible a while later, he had to talk about it. And he does in 1 Peter chapter 2. Jesus' composure under attack was so amazing, he had to say something about it. In 1 Peter 2:20, it says, "If you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly." Jesus does an amazing thing here. He refuses to trade insults for insults, smears for smears, attacks for attacks. He doesn't get into tit for tat, counterattack over and over again. He does not get vindictive. He doesn't descend into the gutter. He doesn't seek retaliation. He refuses, and this is the key, Jesus himself refuses to take the bait. He's not going to get drawn into this. In fact, ultimately, his trolls wanted Jesus to offer back a harsh response. When he got attacked, everyone wanted Jesus to attack him back. Why? Because trolls often have this desire to throw out one salvo, but it's the first. It's the first salvo of what they hope will be many more to come. So if we respond to that first salvo, they get what they want. They get to come at you again with more stuff, more garbage, more attacks, more hate, more shade, all these things. And Jesus refused to take the bait. He took their ability away from them to give more junk, throw more things at him, create more consternation and pain. And in the end, their only goal is to ruin our day. And we make the mistake when we think that our words back to them are going to hurt them. See, this is a mistake we make sometimes. We figure, that troll said something, that person said something, man, I'm going to nail them back. So we say something mean and hurtful and insulting back, and we think, yeah, we got it, and we miss the point. That doesn't hurt them at all. Our angry, hurtful words, insults, don't hurt them at all. Because they're not interested in the words, they're interested in manipulating your emotions. And when you respond in anger and rage, they win. They weren't even focused. A lot of people aren't even focused on an issue. Some are, but many people aren't even focused on an issue. They simply want to get you emotionally connected in an angry, hateful way. They want you to respond harshly because they then have power over us to manipulate our emotions. And you only reinforce their behavior when you react. This is why the Bible talks about this. I mean, Proverbs, was written, thousands of years ago, and it's relevant. The Bible is incredibly relevant for our lives today. Proverbs 23:9 says, don't bother talking sense to fools. They'll only poke fun at your words. Wow. Proverbs 26:4. Don't answer fools when they speak foolishly, or you're going to be just like them. You too could descend to the troll space under the bridge. You can bring yourself down into the abyss under the bridge with the troll if you want to, because you can become just like them if you're not careful. And so ultimately, we need to see Jesus not taking the bait. We have to be careful as well not to do that too. Another thing is that when we think about trolling, a lot of times we have to understand that the troll has a very particular strategy. And it's a fishing technique. Now, some of you probably have gone fishing before. And I like to fish. I've gone fishing a few times and caught some decent fish, but trolls have a very particular strategy, okay? What they do is what some fishermen do. They like to chum the water. So this is what they do. They chum the water. And so they're going to take caustic comments. They're going to take angry words, false accusations, and smears. And they're going to throw bait into the water. That's what fishermen do. They throw bait into the water to draw the fish in, and then they throw their line in hopes of catching a fish. That's exactly what trolls do. They chum the water, they throw bait into the water, they throw their line, and they wait for somebody to come along and take the bait. So they're going to come along and they're going to say, this cow seems like real friendly, but it's not, because I'm going to methane you. Okay, monkey will kill you. It looks friendly, it will kill you. This bowling ball is meant to hit your head. Okay? Spider, deadly. And I'm just going to chum the water. And I don't care who picks it up, because ultimately, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my line. I've chummed the water, and I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm just going to throw it out there. Right there. and I'm waiting. Wait a minute. I think I got something. And I just wait until I grab something and I hook it. That's exactly what trolls are trying to do. They throw out these explosive comments and statements, and then they just wait. And if you're willing to step into it, they'll nail you too. So that's the strategy. That's the plan. They're chumming the water all the time. And the key thing here is to never, ever take the bait. There's one other thing that we can do in the midst of all this is we should assess why we're so inclined to take the bait and let the troll have power over us in the first place? Why are we so inclined to actually feed the troll and respond to the troll? One of the most important skills that we can have in this life is the skill of self-assessment. If you want to be a healthy person, the most important thing is to begin to look at yourself and say, why do I think the way I do? Why do I feel the way I do? Why do I react the way I do? There's a reason, and healthy people begin to do self-assessment about these things. Why do I tend to get mad so easily? Why do I respond in anger in this way? Why am I inclined to attack other people and belittle them and insult them? What is going on inside of me? We tend to blame others for what's happening to us. We blame others for how we feel. We blame others for our circumstances, but we fail to see that that blame is misplaced. That blame is misplaced because you have a lot more power than you realize. You have a lot more ability to control things than you understand, because all of us have the ability to control our thoughts. And our thoughts influence how we feel, and our feelings influence our attitudes and our actions. So we have a lot of power, but what happens too often is we blame other people for making us mad. But no one makes us mad. We make ourselves mad by the stories we tell about the situation. Our thinking process is the key in all of this. And the most important question we can ask about ourselves is why we tend to respond to trolls the way we do. Why are we inclined to feed them? The authors of the best-selling book, Crucial Conversations, put it this way. The first step to achieving the results we really want is to fix the problems of believing that others are the source of all that ails us. It's our dogmatic conviction that if we could just fix all those losers, all would go better. But this keeps us from taking action that leads to dialogue and progress. The best dialogue turns this around. They believe the best way to work on us is to start with me. The best way to work on problems and difficulties and issues and conflict is not to point the finger at the other person, but to actually look at ourselves and say, what is going on in me? Why am I kind of screwed up on all of this? Now, this applies to handling difficult people who we do know more than it does trolls we don't. But I think that we have to see here a basic principle, that we are responsible for our feelings. Our thoughts influence our feelings. We are responsible for our moods. Moodiness is a choice. We're not puppets. We're not powerless. Moodiness is a choice, and we choose our moods. Others don't make us do anything. People don't make us do anything. Others reveal what's in us. That's what they do. They reveal what's going on inside of us. And sometimes we fail to see how our thinking about a situation can make something far worse. Your thinking can make a situation far worse than it is, or it could make it a lot better too. You have immense power right here in your mind, in your thinking process. So the question is, why are we reacting the way we do? Sometimes we react out of fear. We're fearful of the future. We're fearful of losing control. We're fearful of this going in a bad direction. So we're fearful. We react out of fear. Others of us react out of insecurity. We question our value. I'm not sure I'm valuable. I question my looks because everybody's got to look perfect and Instagram and all this. So we question our looks and we say, well, they're questioning my looks and I question my looks. Man, that's a bad situation. We get depressed. We get depressed. People are depressed on social media. They're depressed because of the comparison game. They get deflated by all these different things. They find themselves kind of distracted by this, and it really undermines their own lives. They can get defensive and say, you say that to me. And that feeds into the next thing. We can react out of pride and say, wow, you're going to make fun of me. You're going to question my arguments. You're going to question my character. So I'll show you. You want to see something? You want to mix it up? That's fine. Let's do it. And we react out of pride. But all these things take us down a dangerous path where things that could get better actually get far worse because of our reactions to them. There's one other thing that happens. Often today, we see this increasing, really, that we react out of a false sense of nobility. This is really becoming much more prevalent today in our world. I read the story recently of a faculty meeting where the teachers got together to discuss a new curriculum. And the first person to speak was a guy named Royce. He'd been a chemistry teacher for 33 years. He was a fixture at the school. He was seen as the elder statesman of the school, but he was a little eccentric too. So Royce got up there to speak, and he began to talk, and he started wandering off topic. He was over here, wandering off topic. And then he started making parallels between curriculum and war strategy, because he liked to study war strategy on the side, and so he was doing that, adding all that in. He did a couple other kind of embarrassing things, and by the time he wrapped up, basically the teachers were smiling to themselves and saying, yeah, that was a little awkward. Well, next up was Brent. Brent was a younger guy. He had been part of the curriculum process, and he began to talk. But as he began to talk, Royce was still in war theory mode. And he was using a yardstick as a bayonet. And just at that moment, Brent exploded in anger, in absolute fury. He took his hand, he threw it down on the table, he smashed it down, and he just was out of fury, said to everybody, am I the only one here who wonders why we let an old fossil like this guy talk at all? I mean, did the guy even get his pills today? Well, after that, all the teachers were like wide-eyed, stunned. And then Brent, sensing that they thought he was probably nuts, basically defended himself and said, don't look at me like that. I'm the only one who has the guts to tell the truth. Have you ever heard that one before? So in other words, Brent basically slams Royce in public, just insults him and demeans him in a very rude way. And then he argues that his rudeness is actually nobility. He's being noble. He's the only one who has the guts. You see, what happens here and what people sometimes miss are two things. First of all, Brent made what psychologists and researchers call the fool's choice. It's called the fool's choice, believing that we can't be honest and tell the truth and also maintain the relationship. It's a fool's choice because you can actually do both. You can tell the truth and also maintain the relationship. But Brent was foolish. The other thing that we learn here is that pride often disguises itself as nobility. I'm the noble one. I'm self-righteous. I got to tell you the truth. When in fact, it's really much more about pride. So next time you hear somebody say something insulting or rude or over the top or cutting or demeaning of someone else, next time you see that, recognize that underneath the surface, this is not about honesty. It's much more about poor social skills and the fact that we just can't control our own language. It's not about honesty at all. It's often about our pride. So here we have a picture of a lot of different things that we can gravitate towards. We can find ourselves in a very defensive, attacking posture. And I think for us as Christ followers, we have to ask the question, should we be different? In other words, should we be reacting to situations in our lives or online in fear? Should we be fearful? As a Christ follower, should I be afraid of what my future holds? Should I be afraid of tomorrow? Should I be afraid of a loss of control when in fact God says that I am so loved that His perfect love, His absolute perfect love for you, just the way you are, He loves you just the way you are. His perfect love for you actually casts out all fear. In other words, we as Christ followers have absolutely nothing to fear in this life because of God's enormous power and his great love for us. Should we as Christ followers react out of insecurity? Should we diminish ourselves and say, I don't look like this, or I can't do this or do that? No, we got to throw out the comparison game because God loves you the way you look, the way you are, who you are, the way you're wired, all that. He created you. We've got to stop demeaning ourselves. And we have to stop allowing trolls to feed into that insecurity because God says you are immensely valued, special in his eyes. He calls you into a relationship with him. He died on the cross. If you were the only one, he would have still done it. That's how valuable you are to him. Should we be reacting out of insecurity? No. Should we be reacting out of fear when God is God and we are not? We need to come to the conclusion, man, I should live humbly because I am not God. I don't have it all figured out, but you do. And should we react out of a false sense of nobility? No. All these things are dead ends. And the key thing in all of this is to refocus our brains, to think differently so that we don't take the bait, we don't get into situations where we find ourselves responding and being just like the troll. And so the question for you today is this, what is your style under stress? When you feel stress in your life, how do you respond? Do you respond out of fear and anger, insecurity, self-righteousness? I got to tell you the truth because I'm the bearers of the truth and I got to tell you, and we lose all sense of social skills altogether. How do we go about it? The book of James gives us some important insight into that. Because there's two ways that we can go in reacting and responding to difficult people, to trolls in our lives. And he describes the first way in James 3, verse 13. It says, do you want to be counted wise, to build a reputation for wisdom? Here's what you do. Live well, live wisely, live humbly. It's the way you live, not the way you talk, that counts. Mean-spirited ambition isn't wisdom. Boasting that you are wise isn't wisdom. Twisting the truth to make yourself sound wise isn't wisdom. It's the furthest thing from wisdom. It's animal cunning. It's devilish conniving. Whenever you're trying to look better than others or get the better of others, things fall apart and everyone ends up at others' throats. So what is the result of living the first path, the mean-spirited, angry path? What's the result? Conflict. Breakdown of relationship, a failure to resolve things, very prevalent in our world today. It's where everyone gets negative and beats each other up out of pride and anger. But there's a better way, there's another way, and it's the way of humble wisdom. Instead of just blaming others, we do an honest assessment of ourselves. We realize that we contribute by our thinking in a huge way to our problems and our anger. And then we step away from it. We refuse to take part in this going for the jugular, going for other people's throats. We have another path, and James continues to talk about that. He says, real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is a gentle and reasonable overflowing with mercy and blessings, not hot one day and cold the next, not two-faced. You can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoys its results only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other, treating each other with dignity and honor. 2 times in this passage, we see that James is linking God's wisdom with us getting along with other people. In other words, James is saying that one of the hallmarks of a person of faith, one of the earmarks of true faith, of being a Christ follower, is just that we get along with other people. That's one of the things that shows up. So in other words, because, we're who we are and what God has done for us, it changes us. We get along with other people, even not just our friends, not just the same people that, we hang out with, but difficult people. We work at it. And even our enemies, we work to get along with others. It's one of the earmarks of true faith, When people see you and me, they should see that that's really important to us, getting along with others. And we see too that James says, don't be under the illusion it's easy. This is hard work. It's difficult. It's not going to be something that is just comes to you without effort. It's definitely going to take some energy and focus to get it done. Other verses talk about be at peace with all men as far as it is possible. In other words, you basically don't be the one to screw it up. And that's what James is saying. That's what Scripture is saying. Don't be the one to screw it up. If somebody else doesn't want to take your kindness, if somebody doesn't want to hear your point of view, if somebody doesn't want to take your olive branch, that's up to them. That's up to them. But as for you, you have a responsibility to get along with others and to do everything you can to be at peace with all men, as far as it's possible. For some it will, for some it won't. But it won't be because of your lack of trying. So ultimately, we need to assess why we react the way we do and to choose a better path. But there's one last thing I think we can do in dealing with trolls and dealing with this negative culture. It's this: express yourself, but give up your right to win and punish. Express yourself, but give up the right to win and punish. You see, one of the things that we look at in Jesus' life is in his last moments, when he was getting trolled really hard, Jesus was silent. He didn't respond to the trolls. And we can learn something from that, but first we need to see that could be misunderstood too. That it's not saying that there's never an instance when we need to speak up, because the truth is, there are times when we need to assert ourselves. There are times when we need to step into conflict. There are times when we need to work at resolving things, and that can involve difficult conversations. This is not saying that we should step away from conflict or difficulties. But what it is saying is that we need to be careful to do it in a particular way. Because Jesus wasn't afraid of conflict, but he was unwilling to get into the gutter with other people in the midst of that conflict. He didn't want to convey to the world the values of a loving father and himself in the process do it in an unloving way. You know, sometimes we have this issue in mind, so we're going to go throw the issue out there and it's God's issue and all this, and yet we convey it in an unloving way. We contradict the very issue we're advocating for by our attitudes and our hurtful rhetoric. And God's saying, don't do that. Don't get sucked into that. In fact, we need to give up our right to win. Now, I think some of this involves a couple different responses. The first is, there are times when you're going to need to shut out the troll. One of the most important things you need to do sometimes is that if you're getting trolled hard, is to just shut it down. Do not respond. Back away from it. Don't feel like you have to make comments to it. Go into radio silence. Unfriend them. Don't feel like you have to respond. Don't feed them. Ignore them. Basically, shut them down. That can be a very important response to your troll. There are other times when maybe it's more issue-focused. And it's in those times where we see Scripture talking about conflict resolution. And that's where we have to step in and address it. But we need to give up these two most precious dysfunctions. These are the two most precious dysfunctions. We love them so much. I gotta have it. The dysfunction of winning. I gotta have the win. I gotta give up this precious dysfunction of punishing. I gotta punish them for what they've done to me. These are things that don't bring us to a good place. It makes us the troll too. It brings us to the abyss. It brings us beneath the bridge. And so ultimately, we can do this when we focus on the issue, when we agree to disagree, when we have respect, when we show empathy, when we compromise, when we do all those things, we can step away from verbal violence. We can step away from the disrespect, and maybe we can even solve a problem or rebuild a relationship. And that would be a radical shift So ultimately, we need to see that social media can bring out the worst in us. It can bring out the best. But we can assert ourselves, but do it differently. We can do it in a way that maintains our values, maintains our commitment to God. And here's the truth. Maybe for some of your issues, it would be better for you not to throw them out on social media anyway. Because I'll tell you the truth, there are a lot of things out there. I have a lot of things, and I think about things and all that, and I don't even comment online about stuff because I want to make sure if I'm having a conversation that we can have a conversation as adults where we say, okay, I see that view, have that view. Then you can come to some kind of conclusion. But online, your chances of doing that are almost zero. Almost zero, because people just want to fight. So maybe we should take our conversations elsewhere with other people. And ultimately, in the end, we don't have to win every argument. And in the end, we don't have to punish the people who hurt us. This is what enabled Jesus to maintain his composure. 1 Peter 2:23, we just read it. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, here's what he did. He entrusted himself to him who judges justly. So make no mistake today that Jesus sees every injustice in this world. He sees every injustice that you're facing, every bit of unfairness that has come your way. He knows about the vindictive things that have been said about you and the smears that you've faced, the false accusations that have come your way. He sees all those different things. And just because you show self-restraint, and just because you refuse to get in the gutter, and just because you refuse to try to punish that other person, don't make the mistake of thinking they're off the hook, because they're not off the hook. God is a God of justice, and he will judge justly. And in the end, he's going to take care of our trolls. He's going to take care of the negative people. And in the meantime, we don't have to be like the troll. And in the meantime, we definitely don't need to feed them. Let's pray. Father, thank you, Lord, that you give us an example of someone who showed great self-restraint. And the end result is a community of people that follow your example. The end result's going to be a community one day beyond this life of great joy and peace, of reconciliation. Lord, help us to bring a semblance of that to this world today. Help us not to react harshly, even though every one of us is inclined to do just that. Help us to react like you do, to assert our views and assert ourselves and to speak up, but at the same time to do it in a radically different way, that we'll keep that relationship alive, that we'll not make the fool's choice, thinking we can't be honest and maintain the relationship. Lord, help us to do both. And Lord, give us strength to choose the right path, because in the end, we'll never regret following you, and we'll see the results in our lives and our relationships. And we'll give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.